Hello, everyone. You are listening to She Leads with Carly, and in this show, we talk to the absolute best, brightest, and yes, badass leaders. I'm your host, Carly Malatsky. Hello, everyone. I am super excited to welcome our guest today, Kiki Couchman and Elan Halpern, the co-founders of Beny Yogurt, a new delicious organic yogurt packed with gut-friendly probiotics. Before starting Beny, Elan was a product manager at a tech company called Alchemy, while Kiki worked at a private equity firm known as Alpine Investors. Both Stanford grads, Kiki studied human biology and Elan studied computer science. But their connection wasn't just academic. It was actually built on a strong friendship and a shared passion for food, health, and the microbiome. When they realized there was a clear gap in the yogurt aisle, they knew they had to do something about it. Before they knew it, they took the leap, leaving behind financially stable careers to go all in on founding Beny. Now, through building a community and sharing their journey on social media, they're making a name for Beny Yogurt. Welcome to the podcast. I am so excited to have you guys. Obviously, I know you from Stanford, but now to kind of talk about what you're up to now is incredible. So first, are you guys back in New York right now?
Yeah, we're back. We just flew back from LA. We were in Anaheim for Expo West, which is the biggest food convention in the US. There were 65,000 people there, but now we're back.
We're going to talk about that and just learnings from Expo West, because I've heard it's probably one of the biggest trade shows for the space that you're in. So what I like to do is first, Kiki, I'm going to start with you. So you grew up in Sonoma in California, beautiful, beautiful Sonoma County, if you will. And I want to know, if I were to ask your parents right now of what type of kid you were, how would they describe you?
Oh my God. I'm laughing because my parents just sent me a bunch of childhood photos of myself. And I am so dorky looking, like the dorkiest kid that you've ever seen. My parents, I was always a really good egg. That was the way to describe it. I have had wire-rimmed glasses. Not that means anything.
It means something.
I have had wire-rimmed glasses since the age of 3. So I've had really, really bad eyes since then because I always bumped into things. My mom knew that something was up. And I feel like that has been my personality basically since then. I had a cute little bob and these pink or red little wire-rimmed glasses. And I was always straight A student. I wanted to be a teacher when I was in 3rd grade. And I had a rolly backpack. So
cute. I could see it all. Honestly, we may need to kind of attach a headshot of you as a kid. That would be ideal. And so at that time, so like you said, you're very studious. Did you love school? Were you always thinking of what's next? What am I striving for academically?
I don't know that I was always thinking about what was next, but I did love school. I loved school and I loved doing things well. I was definitely a people pleaser growing up, but also school came easier for me. And so it was something that I knew I could excel in and sort of get the positive feedback from both my teachers and my classmates and everyone else in my school community. And it also was something that my parents never put pressure on me for, but implicitly I felt the need to always perform well in the end.
Tell me a little bit about your parents. What elements, what did they do, and what elements of that do you think influence who you are today in founding Beny?
Yeah. Well, my dad was a founder, so I think that's the first thing. He was a founder in sort of the farming, agriculture, wine, vineyard space without getting too much into it. But he also grew up on a dairy farm. And so I also think there's a huge part of that he is shocked and also pleasantly surprised that I have found myself back in dairy after, many years. And so there's that literal influence from my family. And then I would also say from my mom's side of the family, she was an immigrant to the US from China, and her whole family has always really valued hard work and what that means. And I think founding Beny and really being able to create value in something together and work for that fully ourselves is something I've learned a lot from her and from her whole family.
Wow, that's amazing, by the way. There's 2 core elements of both of them that you can see, today with what you're doing, which I love. Elan, now to you. So you grew up in New York City, is that right? In the city?
Yeah, I grew up in the city, downtown.
Oh my God, amazing. So, okay, I'm going to ask you the same question. If I were to ask your parents today, what type of kid were you? Well, how would they describe you?
Could not be more opposite than Kiki. Imagine the exact opposite of Kiki. That's probably what it was.
She was a cool kid.
I did not have a rolly backpack.
No, the cute little glasses? Okay.
Let's see. I was always really into sports and athletics. So I would say I had kind of a competitive athletic nature since I can remember. And it's funny, I'm recalling this memory when I was in middle school, like early middle school. And there was a big like obsession with Yu-Gi-Oh cards. You guys know what Yu-Gi-Oh cards are? And like I honestly had zero interest in them at all. But I saw that I went to middle school in Chinatown, so it was like a
Okay.
lot of like, kids who are really into Yu-Gi-Oh cards. And I was like, I don't care about this at all, but like I found this like place where I could buy like 1,000 Yu-Gi-Oh cards in bulk. And so I bought them and I started a business selling Yu-Gi-Oh cards. I'd like make these like mystery packs and sell like 20 random cards to these kids. And I feel like that was like a little bit of like how I was as a kid. I was just like a little like hustler.
What was like the intrinsic motivation there? Was it like, oh, I want to make some money? Or was it more of like the competitiveness? Like, where do you think fed that?
It's probably a little bit of both. It's definitely, I didn't grow up with very much money. So I was on like a full scholarship at Stanford, and I went to boarding school for high school also on a full scholarship. So I never really grew up with a lot of money. So I think that's probably an intrinsic motivation for me, was like, oh, how do I like make money for myself? But at the same time, again, like going back to sports and being competitive, I think I've always, I played a sport at Stanford as well. I was on the crew team. And I think that's sort of always been a part of my nature since I was a little kid.
I love it. Okay, so you even mentioned Stanford, right? Both of you went to Stanford. That's obviously where I met both of you guys as well. And Elan, you said you were on the crew team at Stanford, which, by the way, from like, at least for other people to know, like that's in my mind the most insane sport. You wake up at like 4 a.m. and it's just like takes the most amount of grit and resilience from the outside perspective. So take me into that element. Was that like the main driver of going to Stanford, or what was like the main motivation for you?
So I actually walked onto the crew team. So I had never rowed before I got to Stanford, but it was sort of a moment when I got there. I was like, whoa, this is the first time in my entire life where like I'm not playing a sport. And I'd played basketball really competitively, but wasn't going to go to Stanford for basketball, and ended up getting a scholarship through like academic other stuff. And I kind of got there and was like, wow, it feels really weird to not be like playing a sport and on a team and like working towards something that's bigger than myself. And I kind of got like pseudo recruited by the Stanford rowing team because they saw I was tall and like liked exercising. And so they all kind of latched on and was like, you should walk on, you should walk on. And then I tried out for the team, and, tryouts were very intense, but my mentality was like, I either try out and I don't make the team, but I get into really good shape for the next couple of months, or I try out and I make the team and I get to see what it's like to play a Division I sport, on a team that's really competitive and has a history of national championships. So I actually Kiki and I went abroad together at Stanford. We went to Spain, which is I think really where we became really close friends, when we were abroad in Spain together. When I got back from Spain, I decided to put a pause on rowing and see what it was like to go to school as like a normal student, which, by the way, is like totally different. Like it felt like I transferred schools being an athlete versus not.
I get it. I get it.
Yeah,
I had that I got cut off because of COVID. So I literally got like a week of normal life in a way. Maybe not. Okay, so Kiki, now on your end, how did you get into Stanford? What made you go to Stanford, and what made you excited about that?
It's a hilarious question because I'm like, it's just like a
Lottery,
essentially.
Throwing darts.
It does feel like that, but I was not an athlete. So like, actually, like neither of you guys, I didn't have the experience of being a student athlete. Actually, growing up, Stanford was always the conservative country club, like down the road. It was 2 hours away, but in my head, like the South Bay was always like where all the libertarians lived. And it was like always the really, I don't know, it was just like the very elite private school in the neighborhood that obviously is really hard to get into, but it just felt like a different world away. And both sides of my family, almost everybody went to a UC. So my mom went to UC Santa Cruz, my dad went to UC Davis. He went to business school at Berkeley, so there's that like minor rivalry.
Yeah.
And everybody else went to like Berkeley or Davis, essentially. And so for me and my family, Stanford was always sort of both unattainable, but also completely inaccessible, like inaccessible in a lot of ways. And so, of course, I put my name in the hat because like, why not put my name in the hat when I applied to schools, really thinking I wouldn't get in. Like I didn't apply early there because I did not think that it was going to be a real shot for myself. I was a great student. And, I applied myself in all the ways in high school, both academically. And then I was also a lot of extracurriculars and a lot of just like sports, but like school sports, nothing competitive beyond that. And was lucky enough to get into Stanford. And both my maternal grandparents had already passed away, but it was such a moment for my whole mom's side of the family, given they were immigrants. that I got into Stanford. Like it was just like such a big deal for them. And so that was really touching. And also for me, just like a real sign that I should go there. And like, I have to, I mean, it's like the best school. Of course I'm going to go if I get in. So
I was going to ask, it was like an obvious decision once you did get in. You were like, yeah, I'm going here.
deciding between a school on the East Coast and Stanford. And ultimately what it came down to was like the Ivy League schools were so rigid in their academic curriculum. And Stanford, even though, you know, you still have to take like the power classes and like all those sorts of things, ultimately, all the majors are also very interdisciplinary. And the way that you get to design your majors, you get to pull in so many different things. And I can talk about human biology or whatever you want, but that's just one example of how, yes, it's hard biology and like the normal science of it, but it's also psychology and the entire human experience and the healthcare economics and like how all those things fit in together. And to me, that was just so much more interesting and fit my personality. And I mean, hence even starting Beny, it's like, every day it's something new and there's a million different things that I can learn about and apply myself to. And that just was so much more attractive to me about Stanford and the academic offerings there.
And okay, so you even mentioned it, like what attracted you to the human biology major. And for most people, those who studied hum bio, it was most common, I would say, to go the pre-med track and to go become a doctor. Was that something for you? You knew right off the bat that you were like, I don't want to become a doctor, but I do want to study human biology. Why did you choose that?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely, I knew it off the bat. Then I got into hum bio and then I was like, oh, wait, maybe I should be a doctor because everyone's doing this. And so I started exploring that track. And then I was like, wait, actually, I do not want to be a doctor and this is not the track that I want to be down. So I had my own sort of like journey with that whole career path. But the reason I was really attracted to it was, I think, both from my background. So I grew up in agriculture, right, in the wine industry. My dad is from a dairy farm and a whole dairy family. And I knew that I wanted to explore the relationship between humans, nutrition, and the land. And what did that look like? And for me, it wasn't quite environmental science. I was slightly less interested in the environmental aspect of it, though that was an element of it. I was interested in the human aspect of it. So what's the effect on our health depending on what we eat, what we drink, whatever it might look like, and how we interact with the land that we cultivate. And so I wanted to sort of do a deeper dive. So within human biology, I had a specific focus of food systems. And then I was like totally attracted to the whole doctor thing. But I actually realized for me, what I want in my career, I really want to climb the ladder at my own pace and build what I want when I want. And being in medical school and then going into residency and then doing a fellowship and then being within a specific track just was not the right path for what I wanted.
It was almost like it was too rigid. You were like, I need a little bit of that freedom.
Way too rigid. I need so much. And I think like, you know, we can speak to why we both left our jobs, but it was feeling like a place where no longer was the sky the limit. And I want to be at a place where the sky is the limit at all points and I can learn about anything I want and go in any direction and be able to create value and see the impact of that.
And you even mentioned the like food systems and how it impacts our health. That, from what I understand too, I think I may have heard this on a podcast, but growing up, you picked your own fruit. You rarely went to a grocery store, which is very unique and amazing. But like you've always been exposed to that type of eating.
True. We did have to go to grocery stores to get like rice and like bread.
Okay, yes. But fruit, produce. But produce.
Produce. Like it's actually one of those things where it's like, yes, everybody has like the sticker shock of buying berries once you're like a real adult because you're like, holy shit, those are so expensive. I never knew that. But truly, I have never had to buy like a tomato or cucumbers or broccoli. I mean, Elan's in our backyard. It is, we have awesome. Like at least 75 tomato plants every year. So like we are pretty good on this, you know? And so it's also like if we don't have chickens. If we don't have chickens, our neighbor has chickens. We can get the eggs from our neighbors and we'll give them tomatoes and peaches in return.
Oh my God, that is so cool.
An informal ecosystem that was happening in our community at all.
I remember from Stanford days seeing your Instagram stories of these like incredible peaches. I remember that so vividly and I was like, oh my God, this is insane. So Elan, on your side, what made you decide to study computer science? And was this something that, like, when did you start coding? Was it before college?
No, it wasn't before college. So I think when I went to Stanford, I initially thought I wanted to do something in business, like MS&E, which is like a unique to Stanford major, or econ or something like that. And I got there and was like, okay, why don't I just take the intro to computer science class? It's sort of like everyone does it. Like in some point in their freshman year, everyone takes the intro to CS. So I took it freshman fall And what I realized during the course of the whole quarter is that I would do these homework assignments and I would complete it and I would get it to work. And then I would like jump out of my chair with excitement that this thing was working. And I had this moment where I was like, whoa, I've never felt this way about homework. Like, when have you ever done a math assignment and then been like so excited, or written a paper and then been like, this is so good? Like, you just never have that reaction. What's interesting about computer science is that when you code something up and you run it, it either works or it doesn't. It's not like when you submit an essay or a paper and you could think it's really good, but then your TA or your professor reading it can be like, this was trash, and like you get a lower grade than you expect. Like with CS, of course, there's like better code than others, right? You could be more efficient, you could use fewer lines. But generally speaking, if you can get it to work, then it works. And there was something so satisfying about, working really hard on this problem set and then having it work by the end and knowing that this is correct. And that just got me really fired up. And I sort of had this thought that was like, okay, if I'm so excited about doing this, like, why wouldn't I just study this, right? I've never felt this way about any other subject.
For people outside of Stanford, by the way, like studying CS, the most common path afterwards is continuing in tech, right? Whether it's like being a software engineer at any tech company. Is that how you were thinking about your career once you realized that you have this passion for CS?
Yeah. So I sort of thought about it in two ways, I would say. One is that, and I give this advice to like every high schooler or like freshman in college, and they're asking like, what should I major in? And I'm a big advocate for computer science, obviously, but also other majors. And the way I think about it is, how do you create two-way doors? So I think that there's a couple of professions and a couple of majors that you can do where actually by doing this, you still have a two-way door. So let me give you a concrete example. If I study computer science and then eventually I want to start a yogurt business, that's actually like not a one-way door. Like I can't be like, I can never start a yogurt business because I'm doing computer science. But let's say I studied history and then I wanted to become like an aerospace engineer. Like that's a little bit of a one-way door. So I felt, but if you studied aerospace engineering and then wanted to go into history, like that feels more like a two-way door. So the whole premise is like, maybe you can study something that teaches you how to think, but it keeps your doors open. And I knew that by studying computer science, if I did end up wanting to do something in like business, broadly speaking, that would be a much easier jump than if I started in business and then wanted to go be a software engineer later. So it was sort of like that. And then, I had a ton of fun coding. I ultimately realized I did a couple software engineering internships at Facebook and Instagram over the course of Stanford every summer. And I kind of realized in the end that I like coding a lot, but it didn't feel like it was the best use of my strengths as an individual. And I wanted to explore other roles that might have been better for that. And so I ended up going into product management. And I was a product manager at a tech company for 4.5 years, which felt like was very much suited to my strengths as an individual.
Let's stay at Stanford for a hot second. Yeah. Elan, I learned that you would make ice cream. Tell me about that process. What even made you want to make that? How did you do it?
Yeah, I started my dairy career in ice cream, I would say.
Yeah.
She had an account called Crypto Creamer.
I did.
No way. Was this at Stanford or afterwards?
I started making ice cream senior year and then really got into it afterwards. Actually, Kiki and I lived together in San Francisco and I bought an ice cream machine and a friend gave me this like restaurant grade ice cream machine that I would use. And I just got really, really into making ice cream. And honestly, like I think I've always sort of been into food. I actually ended up taking a class with Kiki that was like on health systems and nutrition just for fun, even though it wasn't a part of my major. And I worked at a restaurant before joining Stanford as well. So I've always had this like parallel interest in food and loved ice cream. So it felt like a fun use of time.
And was it more of like the fun element, the creative element, or was there a health element as well that you wanted to create ice cream?
For this one, it was just pure joy. I mean, I ended up getting really into, which I think is very much where I focus on Beny as well. I got really into the science of ice cream and I would order these like ice cream textbooks. I still have like 10 ice cream books and I'd read them cover to cover on like, what exactly is the science behind making really, really good ice cream? Because I wanted to understand the foundational principles so that I could make really good ones. So I'd run all these experiments and make like ice cream, gelato, and like custard, and like
crazy.
See that it was just
Crazy A/B testing.
Yeah,
of like eggs versus no eggs versus this stabilizer versus this percent milk fat versus this percent sugar and what it would do to the ice cream. I was the beneficiary of all these tests.
We had a lot of ice cream in the house. Like I was like, oh, maybe one day I'll do something in ice cream, but it was really, I loved this thing and I wanted to learn how to make it really well and understand what goes behind making it really well.
For you, by the way, do you learn best by reading or by talking to people? Like, what's your mode of learning?
It's a really good question. I always say, like, I think the best way to truly deeply understand something is to explain it to someone else. So I like reading. I'll like sit down and just like, read something through. But then if I can go and like talk to Kiki and be like, okay, this is how it works, and we go back and forth, that's how you really know that you've learned it and can solidify it.
Okay, so Kiki, before you choose to go work at a private equity firm, how did you guys actually meet? And was it kind of, love at first sight? We're going to be best friends? Was it, mutual friends? How did that start?
Well, I mean, Carly, at Stanford, it's like everybody kind of knows each other within the first year. So I would say we definitely knew each other since the beginning of Stanford, but I wouldn't say that we were friends until, really, we went abroad together and we spent so much time together abroad. And so we went and traveled on the weekends together. We, walked to class every day together. We became really good friends then. And I think that was like the beginning foundation of our friendship, of getting to know each other. But then once we got back to Stanford, we took this food systems class together. And I think that's what really solidified our friendship. And I got to see a different side of Elan as well. She was no longer rowing. And what you didn't give yourself credit for was like, yes, she was making ice cream for fun, but she was also biohacking her way through life starting then, because she was no longer rowing. So it was like, how do I think of ways in which I can maintain my optimal fitness and also incorporate more everyday habits into my life when I don't have this big stack of time that I'm working out? And so that class, every day we sat next to each other, and she brought bulletproof coffee every single morning because she was starting to do like intermittent fasting and wanted to get into ketosis. She would bring me like little sips every morning and I would try a different one. And anyway, it was a whole new entry into, I think, this other side of health, which is where sort of the yogurt began to play in, is how do I take my health into my own hands and do a lot of research on my own. And so that's when we really became friends. And I was like, this girl's insane, but also I really love her. So
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, wait, Elan, given that experiment like on yourself, what I find what's really hard is that we can always, we can take supplements, we can change our fasting, we can do all these things, but it's actually quite difficult to say like, oh, I feel better because of this. Or like my skin is clearer now because I changed this element in my diet. Like it's kind of hard to tell. How intentional were you and like how did you do it so well?
Yeah, it's such a good point. And I think two things. One is trying to like isolate the experiment. So like instead of hitting everything at once and changing all things at once, like let's just try fasting without taking anything else and see how I feel when doing that. I was doing bulletproof coffee for a while, which is basically putting like butter into your coffee. It's just like a really high fat coffee and just kind of gives you fat for fuel. And I did it and I liked it at first, but then ultimately realized like actually my body didn't resonate super, super well with it. So I stopped doing it. But again, just kind of tested that out. And the second thing I would say is that like, I think doing N of 1 studies on yourself is extremely important. And I think there's very few things, especially when it comes to diet, that are universal. Like, for instance, I learned that, okay, like having high fat bulletproof coffee is like not the best for my body, but like it could totally work for someone else.
Wow.
And so neither of us should tell each other that this is the best way to do anything. Through this research, one of the interesting things I found is that like actually having really good and healthy gut microbiome is universally good. So like that's why we're really excited about Beny, for instance. But eliminating vegetables from your diet and doing a carnivore diet, like maybe it works for you and that's great, but like it's not going to work for everyone. So always thinking like, generally speaking, diet is very subjective and you should just do these like N of 1 tests.
Which, by the way, is I'm glad you said that because right now we're in this world where there's so much noise and people feel so much, power to say like, this is what you have to do and this is the way to do it. But like you said, what's healthy for someone may not be healthy for someone else. So I love that. And by the way, it takes a lot of discipline to do what you did. Like that's a lot of, maintaining this experiment for a certain amount of time, and following through with it. Like there's a level of, discipline to that, which I appreciate a lot.
There's always a new one.
Are you doing one right now?
Well, I just did a bunch of lab testing. So I actually just did this lab test. It's called Superpower. They give you a blood panel and they tell you like 100 biomarkers, right? And these are not things that your normal kind of allopathic doctor would test. And so they're telling you all these markers. And generally speaking, I was pretty good, but there's a couple things that I really want to work on. So now I'm starting to do these like targeted things of like, how do I fix these specific biomarkers? And to me, it's really helpful to have like data. So I also went and got a DEXA scan, which is like a body fat and bone density scan in California. Kiki knows. I'm just like, she's probably tired of hearing this. Like every day I'm like, okay, I think I'm going to try this. And we talk about it.
It's honestly great because it's like Elan does all the deep research and she's obsessed with it and she loves it. And she's like, the fringe 1% that like actually will do this and care about it. And I am like, the mass consumer of like a balanced diet that like makes sense in my everyday life. And so by osmosis, I can like pick and choose what's working and what's not.
There seems to be a really nice balance. I love how you guys like go to California. Kiki's all like, we're going to Expo West, and Elan's like, DEXA scan, like that's her main focus. Okay, so I want to go now. Like I said in the intro, Kiki, you went to go work at a private equity firm, which by all worlds, it's very different than hum bio, right? Human biology and even like your passion for studying hum bio. So what ultimately led you to go work at a private equity firm? What were you optimizing for in career-wise?
I would say exactly what Elan said before, which is the two-way door thing. For me, I knew that I wanted to be at a company that would give me more options beyond that first job. And so wherever that was, I knew it was likely not going to be my forever home. And so I knew that whatever first job I was going to choose had to be both like great for that moment and for my learning and optimizing my learning then, but also great for sort of the jumping off point to whatever the next thing would be. And so working in private equity, I knew it would give me a breadth of skills and also exposure to a lot of different types of companies. And I knew one day I likely wanted to operate in a company, right? Whether that is whatever that looks like. I don't know exactly what that meant. And I didn't know exactly what type of company that was going to be. But by being able to be at a private equity firm and sit at the 10,000-foot level, I was able to see so many different types of companies. And of course, it's like at a specific stage. We're not, venture backed or anything like that. But still, I got to see founders. I got to see new operators, how they were running these businesses, how they were thinking about exits, how they were thinking about growth. And to me, I knew that would be a really great opportunity and sort of create that two-way door situation. I would say the other thing that I also give advice to everybody on is honestly choose your job based on your manager, because that person, particularly for women, at the end of the day, is going to be the person who really determines your success, especially at that first stage of your career. To get from like that analyst position to the next jump of whatever that looks like at your firm, you need to have someone who's going to bang on the door for you, who's going to sit with you and who's going to patiently teach you things and who is not going to make you feel bad about that or guilty about that, and who will be your advocate beyond just your immediate team, because that broader exposure to the firm beyond just your one manager is a really important part of your success as well. And so I met my manager through the interview process, and she actually was at the GSB, but she had never worked in private equity before. She was working at the Environmental Defense Fund and other sort of nonprofits prior to going to the GSB. And I met her and just really felt so resonant with her values and what she stood for and why she was at Alpine. And so I felt like this person was really going to be that advocate for myself once I was at Alpine and would give me the option to do whatever I wanted afterwards.
By the way, I had Mandy Ginsburg on the last episode. She was the CEO of Match Group. And her main advice was that exactly, like follow the person, not the company. It could be an amazing company, but if you have a horrible manager, like it won't be great and you won't get a lot out of it. In your mind, going into work at Alpine Investors, in your mind, was it like, okay, I'll do this for 2 years and then kind of recalibrate? Because you were there for 4 years. It was actually a substantial amount of time. What kept you going, and did you ever question that?
I would say that Alpine breeds a very unique culture within private equity, which is that they want to create a lifetime career for you. And so they want to invest in you. And their whole philosophy is around people first, which is if you invest in your people, you will see greater returns to your bottom line and just to your company in general. So they really walked the talk there. And so I continually felt invested in both in terms of my leadership development, my own sort of development across different skill areas, being able to raise my hand and being able to do whatever I wanted to be able to learn and grow in new ways. And so it was never something, I regret or I look back and I'm like, I should have left earlier than that. No, I think I stayed like such the right amount of time while there was still so much growth in front of me. And at every step of the way, like there was a new challenge and I felt really excited about that challenge. And so it was actually quite the norm to stay for a very long time. And I look around me at the peer class that I started with, and like over 75% of people are still there.
Interesting. Okay, before we get into Beny, which obviously I'm very excited about, Elan, I want to know about your experience. First job out of college, you go to Alchemy. Were you a product manager from the start?
No, so I joined Alchemy when we were like 10 people. And so I was like, everyone just kind of did everything and learned a lot on the fly. And I actually started off as an intern. So we graduated in 2020 during the COVID year. And rewinding a little bit, I actually decided to get my co-term at Stanford. And the reason was in part because I knew I didn't really want to do computer science or software engineering as a career. I wanted to do something else. And so by getting a co-term, I bought myself like another summer to try out a new job before going into full-time workforce. And the second part was just out of interest. So the co-term I was doing was in sustainability, specifically focused on agriculture, which goes back to kind of Kiki's interest as well. And it was just pure interest. Like, it wasn't like, oh, I want to go into climate change or sustainability for work. Like, maybe, but it was mostly like, I just want to learn about this. I think it'd be, generally speaking, useful throughout my entire life to understand how these systems work. And I was really interested in the topic. Obviously, I ended up going and working at Alchemy as an intern for that summer. Didn't really know anything about it before. Stayed on for about a month. Quickly realized that this is what I want to do. And there were a couple of things that made me realize that. I think one, which goes back to what you both are saying, you spend more time with your coworkers than you do with anyone else in the entire world. Even if you're working a 9 to 5, but also if you're working at a startup where it's much more demanding and you're spending a lot more time there, the people who you surround yourself with, I actually think is much more important than like the product or company or anything else, which is also why like we're having so much fun and a big motivation for us to work together on Beny. But that was really true at Alchemy. I felt like, wow, I love everyone I'm working with. I think they make me smarter. I think they make me better. And I just like have so much fun going to work, which is very rare. And so that really motivated me to say. And then also I was like new to crypto and blockchain and kind of learning about this technology and became really excited about the potential of it. And so decided to stay on to kind of help push that movement forward.
And were you similar to Kiki in that you saw it as a stepping stone and you were like, I'll stay here and then I'll go do something else? Or were you actually like, wow, like this is it. Like, I love this. This is great.
It's a great question. I think I knew that no matter what, I was going to gain a ton of knowledge and skills applicable to this. I mean, I joined when we were 10, and by the time I left, we were like over 200 people with an international office. So it was a very, very crazy, interesting, wild journey to get from there. I always knew that I wanted to do something else, maybe start my own thing, maybe join another company, but I didn't have a time cap on when I was ready to leave Alchemy. It was, I had a ton of fun the entire time.
Amazing. Okay. I want either of you, whoever it speaks to more, tell me actually the origin of Beny. Who came to who and was like, this is what we should do? Take me back to that room as if I was there.
Yeah. Oh man, it's such a journey actually. So Kiki and I had very parallel experiences, and again, we lived together in San Francisco, and we were both at our companies for the same duration, so the 4.5 years. And consequentially, we both also had very similar moments of realization. We were like, okay, I think we're ready for the next thing. And we were best friends. So naturally, we like called each other about this. We were like, hey, like, I think, what are you looking at? We kind of passed each other different stuff, and we would just be kind of thought partners through the process of finding out what's next. And I think it was about 3 months of this like reflection and coffee chats and just sort of learning about what's out there. We had a little bit of different experiences. So at least on mine, there were a couple of realizations I had through that reflection. One was that I really wanted to be in the health space. And how I realized that was that I looked at how I was spending my free time outside of work, which maybe now is so obvious even for you two as well. And I was spending most of my free time on health stuff, like learning about health, like doing these experiments, going to talks, listening to podcasts, reading books, like everything under the sun with health. And I was like, okay, I should probably just work in that industry if that's really where my passion is. And then the second thing, especially as a product manager, was that I realized I really wanted to work on a product that I'm actually a user of. And Alchemy is an incredible product. It's a blockchain developer platform, but I knew that I was never actually going to use the product as a user. I was not like a crypto engineer. It was a really big unlock to say, okay, I want to build something and work on something that I'm a user of, not only because I'll be more interested in it, but also because I'll be better at my job. Like, I'll be a lot better if every day I can go to sleep thinking about how that product experience could be better. So those were sort of the two really big unlocks. And, 3 months of reflecting, I ended up having this like really early, it was like 6 a.m. on a Saturday. I had this like come to Jesus moment that was like, wait, why don't I start a yogurt company? And had that realization because I'd already been making yogurt for myself
Okay, I was
for
gonna ask, yeah.
yeah. So it wasn't out of the blue. It was like I was making
Yogurt.
I do love yogurt, but and happy to share more on like that journey and process to making yogurt. But I don't know if Kiki wants to chime in on how kind of she got there.
I would say very similar, but for me, it was far less about the health and the product because neither of those things, like I wasn't a product manager and I think health was important, but for me, it wasn't the number one thing. I think I realized, oh, I actually missed that 0 to 1. Like I really want that creative runway that I no longer get at a 100-person firm and like owning a team now. Like I no longer get to just like call a shot and just go that direction. Like there's responsibility that I have. And I think we obviously both feel a big responsibility as part of Beny, but it's different because it's fully our own. And whatever shot we call, like that's because it feels aligned with the mission that we're building. And we get to sort of turn the ship tomorrow if we would like to. And that agility and that ability to create and see the impact immediately, I really wanted to be able to experience. And so it didn't necessarily mean starting a company. It just meant being really early stage somewhere and really getting to contribute to that.
Yeah.
And Kiki, on that, what I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen it so much as well with, your friends, but I feel like around 26, 27 years old, I feel like a lot, especially like Stanford grads, maybe other schools, I don't know, but we have some sort of like quarter life crisis, right? Like, what are we supposed to do in our life? Where are we meant to go? I feel like some go to business school and, are a little bit lost, but cover that up with business school. And then some start a company. And so I want to know, did you have that experience too? And then even more so, did you even feel like because you've been in a private equity firm, you're almost like siloed, like this is part of you and this is all you can do? Did you have that kind of sentiment?
Yeah. I mean, the like negative side of this whole story, if we're to go there, is all these people are going to business school because they're lost. Is starting a company like that much more, oh, we found our way? Like, not really. But it is, oh, we do have something that we feel strongly passionate about. And instead of going to business school and you spend a lot of money going to business school or you're beholden to your company that you just came from, like, can we put that money and that energy and that time into something that we actually get to build and create value? And the other sort of, I think, cynical forcing function of this whole quarter life crisis is I want to have children. And I know that what that means is I have a ticking time bomb, like on myself, both in terms of literal time and hours that I have between now and when that happens, but also financial stability. And there's going to be a time when I need to care for somebody more than just myself. And I need to have the financial means to do so. And so to give myself runway, both to be risky in my financial situation and also with time, I knew that it would have to be now if I wanted to start a company, especially something, that I've literally never done before. Like not only just founding a company, but also in a space. And so that was a really big part of the decision too.
Yeah. No, I love it. I'm so glad you mentioned that because I think it relates to so many of what many women think about. I know myself included, right? Like you have to kind of do the math. Like, okay, in 4 years, I want to have kids. And so this is the time. I don't have kids now. I could take this risk, all of that. Yeah.
And the other side of it was like, oh, I could just stay here and I know I'll have great maternity leave and I'll have, all these parental benefits and everything else. Or do I take these 4 years, 5 years that I have right now in front of me and really go hard on something? And I believe that we can make this successful in that amount of time and we'll be able to see through like whatever we want to see through. And then I'll give myself more option.
So, Elan, when you said you've been making yogurt, what gave you the confidence to say, I should start a yogurt company? In the last 3 years, by the way, were you giving it to friends and they were, loving it? Or what gave you that confidence and even the confidence to also like go to Kiki and be like, let's do this? Because could be crazy.
Oh, for sure. So I guess I'll rewind a little bit. As we've discussed numerous times, like I've always been just very into health and understanding sort of different biomarkers and where I'm at with health. And a couple of years ago, I actually ended up doing a hormone panel. So I got to look at all of my hormone levels and learned that they're actually pretty low, which was surprising. And when I dug into like, how do you actually fix your hormones and what are the root causes here? All roads led back to the microbiome. And so then I was like, okay, what is this thing, the microbiome, and like, why is it important? And I quickly realized that your gut health and the microbiome actually play an extraordinary role in your overall health and well-being, which is why, going back to what I said earlier, how like most diet things are just like very subjective. actually think having a healthy gut microbiome is like the one universal thing that full stop, it affects your mood, it affects your hormone levels, it affects your energy and strength, like just so many things. And I was like, okay, how do you actually make this the best it can be? Like, how do I actually go about healing my gut? And what I learned was one of the best ways to heal your gut is by taking probiotics. And ideally, you get probiotics from actual food sources as opposed to supplements because they're much more bioavailable, which means your body can sort of take them in and absorb them better, a lot more affordable, and you get a better diversity, and just it's more enjoyable than taking a pill as well. And so I was like, okay, as a rower at Stanford, every single morning after practice, we'd eat Greek yogurt. It was just like ritual. We'd get off the dock and the Greek yogurt bowls would already be there waiting for us. So I was like, cool, like I already eat yogurt every day. I should be in pretty good shape. But when I look into conventional yogurt, I actually learned that most yogurt isn't probiotic. And the reason is because it's what's called like dead bacteria. So by the time it actually gets to the shelf, there's just no live and active cultures to actually make your gut feel better and do all the things that probiotics are supposed to do.
Is the reason, by the way, they do that is for shelf life? Like, is to make it last longer, or what's...
Exactly. Yeah. So there's a couple of factors. One, like you said, is shelf life. So what will happen is after they create the yogurt or ferment the yogurt, they'll pasteurize it. And what that does is it kills off all the bacteria, both the good and the bad. So now you have this yogurt that can sit on the shelf for 6 months, but it has no active cultures in it. The second thing is that yogurt, there's tens of thousands of different bacterial strains, and they all play really different roles in your health. Some are really good at digestion. Some are better for oxytocin production. Some help with whatever. And so the yogurt bacteria are really good at making yogurt. They're not necessarily the best bacteria for your gut health and your microbiome. And then the third reason is that there are some companies that are taking probiotics, so bacteria that are specifically, made for your gut, and putting them into yogurt. But generally speaking, they don't tend to have enough. Like your gut has 100 trillion bacteria in it. And to actually make a dent on an everyday basis, you just need so much. And conventional yogurt just isn't produced that way. So what I started doing was I started taking bacteria that are specifically designed to have certain properties and behaviors in your gut and making yogurt out of that and having enough of them where it actually can make a significant impact on my gut. And I did that so that I could heal my own gut and fix my hormones. And I saw just incredible benefits. Like I remember walking into the office one day after eating this yogurt for like 2 weeks, and my coworker looks at me, he's like, "What are you doing to your skin?" And I like infamously like do nothing to my skin. Like, oh my God, it looks so good. I was like, I've literally just been eating yogurt. That was sort of like the impetus for the yogurt making process, I would say. Similar to ice cream in that I became obsessed with it and tried to figure out how to make the best yogurt, but different in that it was really health driven. It was truly like, I love eating Greek yogurt every day. The yogurt in the store is not actually going to be that good for me and not going to help with the things I need help with, but I can make it myself. And now I have this food that I already love eating every day. It's already a part of my everyday habit. And it happens to be really good for me to the level of like a supplement. And so that was sort of the impetus of the yogurt making. And the realization that happened a couple years later in 2024 was sort of like, wait, if there was a yogurt on the shelf that did what mine was doing for me, like I would buy it. And 2/3 of Americans have digestive issues. I think a lot of people would like to be able to make that choice every day that's like actually good for their gut health. And so the first person I called, I remember we actually sat here where we're sitting right now. I had this realization on Saturday. I went over to Kiki's house on Sunday and she was sitting here like doing a Sunday puzzle. She did these like solo puzzles. Perfect. Total nerd. Making puzzle by herself. I came in and I was like, Kiki, I want to start a yoga company. And it was sort of like this moment that was like, of course we should do this together. He was like, wait, yeah. It's funny because I think, especially at Stanford, when you think about your co-founder, it's often CEO, CTO. So you want someone who's, maybe a little bit technical and then one who's like an engineer. And so I don't think either of us maybe ever considered each other as potential co-founders. But for something in CPG, actually you want like not that. Like you want, like we have the perfect kind of overlapping skill set, which we're happy to talk more about that and how we kind of work together later. But it became very obvious that for a product like this, there's no one else I'd rather work with than Kiki.
And Kiki, when you heard that moment of, I want to start a yogurt company for you, I mean, it seems like it was kind of this instant, like, yes, let's do it. Did you guys have almost like a moment of thinking and then being like, wait, maybe this is kind of crazy. There's so many yogurts. Like, what was that?
1000%. We like had, I think we had the initial, oh yeah, totally. Like I'm full in on this. And then holy moly.
We're like, let's understand this a little bit better.
Like Neither of us have been in this space, and this feels like a really hard space just because obviously any consumer aisle is incredibly saturated, particularly in the grocery store, and the margins are really difficult, and we're working with cold chain refrigerated item, and it's an animal product. There's no level of simplicity happening here, but also we sort of gave ourselves a few weeks to think about it, talk to people that we really needed to talk to about this, get a little bit more knowledge of like what we didn't know. And then from there could make a really informed decision that we wanted to do this.
Those people that you talked to during that period, was it more of like mentors of saying like, I'm at a time in my life, I'm ready for this? Or was it more of like those in this industry to know what's bad and what's good about it?
I mean, I think it was a little of both. It was much more on the mentorship for both of us. We did have our space. Like once we were committed, we then made it a mission to really get smart on the industry space and ask every single person we know, do you know somebody who works in CPG? Do you know someone who works in dairy, who works in retail, who works in grocery, who works in whatever it might be? So we could really get a better feel and understanding for what we were walking into. But prior to that, it was much more mentors. And I think that was really helpful to get a mirror reflection of now's the time to do the crazy thing. Or, yeah, you think this is so weird, but actually your skill sets can really apply to this new space. Or when it boils down to it, like these are the two real hard problems in CPG, and it doesn't take a genius to figure that out. Like you will have to learn and you'll have to, figure it out and work hard towards it. But those are sort of the main things. And so that was really helpful in those initial days.
Did either of you have someone that you talked to where it actually made you question being like, okay, no, maybe we shouldn't do this?
My dad, actually.
Okay, yeah.
Full-blown supporter, but he was definitely the person to push back and say, this is so much more of an operational challenge than you realize. And maybe you do realize, but I am just the one to tell you, like, you are no longer working with other Stanford grads. You are no longer working with like this really intellectually challenging and interesting problem. You are working with a supply chain as to whether this gets there on time. You are working with an expiration date, and it's just a timing game. And then you're working with hourly workers on your floor of your plant. And they want an extra $20 to be able to pay their kid tomorrow. Or they got the stomach flu and they can't come in, which means your yogurt is not being able to be produced on time to be able to send to Whole Foods. What are you going to do? And those are the problems that you're going to be working with now versus like, how do you create growth in this type of company over the next 5 years? It's a very different type of problem. I think that was the real push we got is this about creating a brand and like the fun, exciting marketing part of it, which everybody sees on Instagram? Or is it about creating an enduring product that you really care about? Because you need to feel so driven by that mission to get you through the day-to-day grind of these operational logistical challenges that come with building a food company.
I find almost navigating decision-making at this point in our lives is very much tapping into like the energy of like how you feel coming out of a conversation. So like I remember one person told me like you should go to business school, and I came out of that being like, no, like I definitely shouldn't. But I'm wondering, like, when your dad was telling you all this, obviously he also comes from kind of that background on a dairy farm and working on that. So what did that do for you? Was it something that you went to Elan and was like, okay, let's take a step back?
I did go to Elan, and we did talk about it. But I think the real feeling that I had was like, obviously I've thought about this, Dad. Of course right. I've thought about these things. And that actually makes me really want to do it because I want to be able to be somebody who's created a business in a really tough industry and in a tough market and have had to like deal with these challenges head on and come out on the other side having created value from that and my own experience and growth from that as well. And so we had like a whole pre-mortem on the entire situation where we listed every single doubt that we had and everything that could go wrong with this and why we would fail in, all the different iterations of what this yogurt company could look like, and went through and really addressed them and talked through every single one as we had these difficult conversations with mentors. And that, I think, really helped us get very comfortable understanding what we were walking into, why we are saying yes to this, and not it just being a cruise control into the situation, but rather a very intentional decision.
I imagine on that pre-mortem that you wrote, the concept of, starting it with your best friend can be very scary, or at least like, if anything, things can blow up and you guys aren't friends at all. It could affect the company. And I'm sure people told you about that as well. How did you guys navigate that? And how did you approach that with each other?
So on day one, when Kiki and I first went full time, so we were working on Beny sort of nights and weekends while we were still full time at our other companies. But as of January, we were full time. And so day one, we were like, okay, we got to figure our stuff out now. And the first thing we talked about was this exact topic. It was, how are we going to manage Beny with our friendship? Because we are best friends and we love spending time together. And this sort of work and life is about to be so intertwined. And we decided a couple things. One was friendship comes first, and that's like full stop. It doesn't matter what's going on. Like if we need each other to be there as friends, then like that comes way before Beny in all cases. And number two is, how do we resolve conflict? Because that's where I think things get really hairy, is if you don't actually discuss how you resolve conflict until the conflict happens, it can sort of blow up and you're not on the same page. And obviously Kiki and I have like hung out all the time, but we never worked together in this sort of way. We're like effectively like having a child together. Like we're building up this thing from the ground up. And so learning, this is how I like to resolve conflict. These are my strengths. These are my weaknesses. Like all of that, we spent like 5 hours day one, just like going through these sort of interpersonal things to help us be aligned for that. And I think so far, I find that we talk about this a lot, but I find that being best friends is actually a bit of a superpower for us as opposed to a detriment. And the reason for that is because we can give really candid feedback to each other. So I can like create this like Instagram video and like show it to Kiki, and Kiki be like, oh, like that's bad. Like, you can't post that. And I'm like, okay, yeah, you're right. And like there's no hard feelings. Whereas if we weren't friends and she said that, there might be like more hard feelings. It might be a little bit uncomfortable to give that sort of candid feedback. But I know that like we care about each other so much that whatever feedback we give is like all out of good heart.
Do you guys have any, and I may be making this up, but do you have any like tips and tricks to navigate it where I think like on iMessage, you guys only talk about personal things and like do you have anything like that or no?
No. We're just
so it's all a mix. It's all a blend.
It's a huge mix.
Yeah.
We're always voice memoing, sending text back and forth.
We're talking like 24/7.
There's no separation, I would say, in terms of where we talk about Beny and where we talk about our personal lives. What I will say, though, is like that has been really important, is to be in constant communication. And a huge tip that we actually learned from Elan's co-founders, who were good friends and started this company together, was, especially in the early days, keep each other up to speed on every single thing. Because even though we have our own lanes, it's really important that we are both experts in all areas of the business, especially as we're small. And we are both representatives of this company in all areas of the company, right? Even though I don't touch the yogurt textbooks, I need to be very educated about yogurt because I don't know who I'm going to talk to and what I'm going to run into. And I need to be an advocate for that, as well as Elan needs to know all about social media and how we're doing outreach and what events are coming up and where we're doing demos and whose partnerships are important and all those things. Like those are just as important as well for her to know and be an expert on. I think that's a huge tip. The other that I would say that really works in our favor, which we haven't discussed as much, is like we're not competitive with each other. And I think that a lot of friendships, there is an inherent undercurrent of competitiveness. And I don't realize that on a day-to-day basis with a lot of my friends, but it's so easy for us to give feedback because I never see it as a one is better than the other. Like we were just at this convention and we had to pitch Beny to so many people in like a 10-second one-liner. And it was just something where we could both be like, hey, that was like way too long-winded or that didn't land. And I think if we had a slight competitive edge with one another, it would feel really different. And right now, I think both of our competition really lies in just making a really, really good product and building and growing our company. And we are competitive with like Chobani, which feels so out of reach. Like that's where our competition is. It's not at all with one another, which I think is an important distinction to have.
Right. And it's also, if anything, it's a very hard thing to confront. It's a hard thing to like almost recognize that I am competitive with this person, even though it seems like with you guys, it's very much like this is our baby and we're doing everything in our power to just have this baby grow up and be very amazing and big and successful and whatever. So that's amazing. How much time did you guys have from the inception of the idea to saying, okay, we're actually going to quit our jobs?
Yeah, it's a great question. So how it worked was we had kind of the ideation in like May, June. And until around August was very much just like data gathering. We were like, okay, let's just do user interviews. So we interviewed 50 people who eat yogurt every single day. And we're like, why do you eat yogurt? Like, what do you look for in a yogurt? Just like really understanding the market, then talking to people in the industry and getting a pulse on that. And then finally around August, September, Kiki was like, okay, let's just like set a date, like set a launch date. And that was just instrumental. I think that like changed everything for us. We were like, okay, November 9th, we're launching. What do we need to do to get ready for that? Okay, we need to figure out a name for this company. We need to figure out a logo. We need to like actually have a final product iteration that we feel really good about and we want people to try and move forward with. We need some basic kind of packaging. All of those things had to happen to hit our November 9th launch date. And then it became sort of an all-out sprint to that date. And then by the time we hit that, we were like, okay, we feel like this, there's a lot that kind of went to this thought process of going full time. And I would say, like, I'll break it down to three things. One is what Kiki mentioned earlier, like financial stability. I think it's a really real thing you have to think about when starting a business, especially a CPG business that we're bootstrapping and not raising money for. We have to say, okay, can we pay rent for the next 2 years if we're making $0? That was the question to answer. How can we find ways to cover our rent for the next 2 years? It's your biggest expense, knowing that we're going to bring in no money. And there's, we figured out how to do that.
How did you guys come up with 2 years? Where was that timeline?
I think the 2 years was honestly like, how do we create meaningful value for this company before we ever have to think about taking outside funding? So there may be a time where we do. Let's be very clear.
Yeah.
But 2 years really gives us the space to create it in ourselves without taking outside funding. And then the real analogy was business school.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah.
If we're going to business school for 2 years, let's be very clear. It's going to take a lot longer to build a really big, enduring CPG brand. But 2 years is sort of that space where other people are taking a risk. Where's our risk in that time frame?
Got it. By the way, I don't know. You guys, it seems like you're on that track. 2 years seems realistic. Mm-hmm. Anyway, continue. Elan, so what was so financial stability was one.
Financial stability was one. And then number two is the product and saying like, okay, do we actually think that this product is worth investing in? Do we think it has legs? And really understanding the market, consumers, what messaging will land, why we're doing this, all of those things. And I think there's a lot of ways you can do that. I think for us, like we just started like selling yogurt. We were like, can we just sell this yogurt right now? And would it work? And it sort of started to work and we got a lot of good feedback. And so that really helped push that forward. And then the third thing is just like more of a life thing. And I think for both Kiki and I, we throw ourselves into what we're doing, especially when it comes to work. And it came down to like, how are we going to be happiest? What is going to make us most fulfilled in life? And what are we most excited about working on? And it just became abundantly clear that like we woke up every day thinking about Beny and just really, really wanting to work on this.
What I love too is, and I can relate to this, but it's like if you were to think a year from now or 2 years from now, like even if we failed, would we still be happy that we did it?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah. And we're like, Kiki goes back to like, oh, it's like kind of our business school. Like if we do this for the next 2 years and it totally blows up, like we will have learned so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a huge part of it.
Okay, Kiki, you took on, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you took on the marketing and distribution element of Beny. And what that includes is, all of socials, and you've grown your social community like tremendously from even January, right? When you started going full time. How did you do that? What was like the learning curve? How did you learn about it? Like, what's the best way you learned for this?
Oh my God. I'm like, what is the best way to learn? I mean, you have to throw yourself into it. So I would say the first is like trial by error and sticking with it and being consistent in creating new social media posts was one of the biggest things that I could have done for myself. When I first started, I had this feeling of my first few posts are only going to get like a couple hundred views, maybe, and like that's so incredibly low if you know the social media world. And it's embarrassing, right? Like I'm like a normal person who all of a sudden is trying to, become a content creator. Of course, that's embarrassing. I'm like falling on my face in front of so many people. But I knew that wouldn't be enough data to tell myself that I'd failed. If I did that 150 times, okay, I'm working with a little bit more data to see what's working or what's not. And so I set a goal for myself. I have to do this every single day for 3 months. I have to create a video for TikTok and Instagram every single day. And setting that goal didn't mean I always hit it. There were some days where I got so tired and I could not do another reel. But for the most part, I probably did like 75 out of the 90 days. And from there, I really both gained the confidence. I saw, okay, people are actually responding well to these videos. I now have like plenty of content out there. I also was able to look back on the content and actually run numbers and see data on what is the content that people are really interacting the most with, what are people responding well to, how do I sort of iterate my strategy to make sure that it's landing in the best way possible. And then the most important thing, I think, for me was to be comfortable with making content. And as like a normal average person, putting yourself in front of a camera every single day is not supernatural, but literally exposure therapy after 90 days, I am now like way too comfortable in front of a camera all the time. But I think that was a really important muscle for me to tone and hone prior to going full time on this. And I'm so glad I started content prior to going full time, because now it's just something that hums in the background, right? It's an engine and it's just another channel for us to reach new customers. And I don't have to spend 4 hours of my day trying to figure out how to edit a video. And now it can be 30 minutes as we're in the car driving to a convention, and I can post a video, and it's so much easier. So that's really how I learned. And then I would say that like another literal tip for people is consume like you are a creator. Like consume content with the eye for creating content. And that looks really good than being a passive consumer. I study the first 2 seconds of every video. What are people doing? How are they making motions? What are they saying verbally? What are they saying within the video? How are they keeping your attention? Are they asking questions in the middle? How are they ending the video so that way they can get the like most engagement possible? Are they asking a question at the end and asking people to comment? Are they posing, stay tuned for part 2 of this next video? And so those things, being a student of your own craft has also been one of the most important shifts for me, instead of just being a lazy couch rotting scroller.
That's amazing. That was even just tangible advice, which I love. It seems like that is like your like Elan's yogurt textbook. It's like the equivalent of like you studying TikToks and Reels is that. And the other thing I just want to highlight is it's so important of like what your metric is. So the fact that you were not only just like failing publicly, right, which is so scary and why like there's a huge wall for most people to jump into it. But for you, it was like, no, I'm not going to focus on views. I'm going to focus on the 90 videos or like 3 months, and then we'll recalibrate. I think that's so powerful.
Because you're just going to stop if it's about viewership. Like you have to create a different goal. And I feel that for myself now too. There's moments where I'm like, why am I not growing faster? Why didn't this video get as many views? And actually, it's like really not about that now. Now I've shifted it to engagement. How do I ensure that my audience is getting the most value out of me and feeling as engaged as possible with me in this community? And so that looks different. That looks like creating many more question boxes, doing more AMAs on specific topics, understanding what people really want to see rather than let me just grow to 50K. Because actually, if 12,000 of my followers, 12,000 out of 12,000 are highly engaged versus 5,000 out of 50,000, like that's a much better ROI on what I'm doing. That's the more important metric right now for me too.
Kiki, I love that. And I love that you mentioned that. I've seen personally from like the, very beginning, I'm quitting my private equity job to start a yogurt company. Like the fact that I can just say that so quickly is quite insane. Can you actually just touch on that? Like the power, how did you come up with that? How did you come up with starting every video like that exact sentence, all of it?
So kind of it was Elan's idea where she was like, one day she just said, it's going to be so cringy, Kiki, but it's a really viral video if we talk about why we're quitting our 6-figure jobs to go and do this thing. And I was like, ew, I'm never going to post anything about that.
He's like so cringe. He was like, this is so cringe. You can't do it.
It's also like Stanford, like fancy jobs. Yeah.
But it's like a viral recipe.
But it's a viral recipe. And so so that had been sitting in my mind. It had been sitting in the back of my mind as I know this is going to be something that's really important. And the more I talked to people, it wasn't about that. It was molding that idea with the piece of advice, which was in the first 2 seconds, you need to tell the audience who you are and why they need to follow you. Because it's not just important to get a viral video. It's important to convert viewership to followers. And you want people to watch your video and feel a part of your journey and wanting to follow to see the rest of your journey. Mm-hmm. And so by introducing who I am, I'm quitting my job in private equity to start a yogurt company with my best friend. I both tell you who I am, who we are, and where we're going. And you'll see in this next 30-second video what it means to quit your job and to start a yogurt company. But that's only one part of the journey. So you need to follow me to actually continue to see that journey. So that's really where it came from.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. So as of it's been like 3 months since you guys have been full-time on this. What do you wish you knew before going full-time into it?
I would say the most surprising thing is how quickly our calendars get filled and how many competing priorities there are. And I think that's like a duh for anybody who's founded a company. But when I first jumped ship to do this, we knew no one. We didn't know who was in the industry. We didn't know exactly the order of operations for everything. We knew where we had to be, and we knew we could sort of get there however we would by knocking on a bunch of doors. But I think I underestimated how quickly that would come and how hard we would work to get there. And now it's like our calendars are like totally filled, right? Every single day. So I don't know if that's something I wish I knew, but it's definitely something that has surprised me and both, I guess, made me have a greater faith in who we are as well.
Did you guys ever was there ever this tension of going from a super structured job, right? Going to your 9 to 5 or a little bit longer to now, like, you guys are defining how your days are? Like, did that take teaching, experimenting? Because it's kind of like what you said, like filling up your calendar. How did you navigate that?
Yeah, I think we're both pretty disciplined people.
Yeah.
So it was never a concern for either of us that we would be like, oh, why are you not working? Yeah, like, what are you doing? Like, I kind of think we both know how to prioritize time most efficiently and work on important things, such that like the structure of the day became less of like a point of tension.
And I would say like that's both inherent, but also we have spent 4 years in the working world. And I actually think that is very much a part of this story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of, first-time founders who start right out of school don't quite have that muscle. Like if I were to start this right out of school, yes, I'm disciplined, but I don't know that I have the full compass to know exactly what the priorities are. Like what's the important and not urgent in my day? That's something that has been taught a bit over the past 4 years, working at a company that really prioritizes that. And I think that's been an important skill that we've both learned.
How did the name Beny come about?
I was reading one of my yogurt textbooks one day.
Naturally.
we were name hunting at the time, and I was learning about the origin of yogurt, sort of the history of yogurt. And it turns out the original word for yogurt is lebany. It's like an ancient Assyrian word, and it has a dual meaning that means for life and sort of like life in general. And so I saw that and I was like, oh, this is kind of cool, but what if we cut it to Beny instead of lebany? And the reason is because, one, it was like nice to have an ode to like the original word for yogurt. But two, it sort of checked all my boxes for what a good name is. And that is easy to spell, easy to pronounce, starts with a consonant, is just like, early in the alphabet, like all these things that I think are important for a name. It just like ticked all the boxes. And so we ended up going with it and it stuck.
We wanted there to be almost like a creamy, smooth feel. And Beny with a B and the Y, like there's something that feels really smooth coming out of your mouth saying that. In addition to the double play, like on benefits, there's more Bennies in this yogurt. There's, Beny can be a person and it can be almost like an inanimate object. Like this is Beny, and it's both androgynous. And so there were so many other like downstream consequences of this name that we really liked. And it just felt really natural. It just has stuck. And now
it clicked.
Right?
Yeah.
We were playing around with a lot of different
So
names
many
before.
names.
Like we bought so many domains.
Oh my God.
Like have to cancel those.
I love that. Okay, and you guys, you just came from Expo West. Tell me a little bit, what is Expo West? What were like the biggest learnings that you guys took away from it?
What is Expo West? Okay, it's like the biggest food CPG, and CPG stands for Consumer Packaged Goods convention in the US. And it's almost like the Super Bowl or even like Coachella of CPG. And last year was like 65,000 people. I bet it's closer to 70,000 people this past year when we just came from. But essentially, almost every brand under the sun has an exhibit there, and they are showing their products. And that is for both buyers. So think about who's the buyer for yogurt at Whole Foods National, who gets to make that decision. They're roaming the floor. Same with Walmart. Same with, farm people or the smaller CSA box or, Blue Apron. All of those people who are in the food industry who are looking to source CPG products are going past these booth exhibits to see what's the newest product you're putting out, what's your existing product, how much do I buy it for, blah, 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 all those conversations. Additionally, there's suppliers. So, we use milk, of course, we use bacteria. There are other people who use oat milk powder, who use, wheat, who use gluten-free oats, who use, pea protein, all of those things. Those suppliers are also walking around, making contacts with us. There's packaging people, there's distributors, there's logistics, there's freighting, there's everything under the sun that contributes to this whole economy of food CPG. And so that's where we just were. It's highly, highly expensive to actually attend, both as a guest, you can pay about $1,500 per ticket, but also as a brand, you have to pay around $10,000 for a booth, like basically the minimum price. And it goes all the way up to brand spend, I don't know, $500,000 on what a booth looks like. And so we were actually volunteering with a friend's brand, so that way we could just get there for free. And then we also brought our yogurt and started feeding a bunch of people at the expo just to get the word out about our yogurt.
And there's a level of like scrappiness there too, right? Which is like, okay, we're obviously bootstrapping. How do we get our foot in the door? I think that's so important, and it's been trickled in throughout your story.
Oh my God, Carly, everything we do is incredibly scrappy.
So scrappy.
It's like one of those things where, you know, I'm both so proud to say, like, we've figured out every single workaround to every single thing. And it's like, you know, almost a cliche of how scrappy we are. We're literally biking around with our Hydro Flasks that we got for free because I messaged Hydro Flask full of our yogurt that we're selling on the street. And so like everything is, you know, everything is both.
Yeah. But I love it. I think there's also this mentality of like, what's the worst case that could happen? Like they say no. It seems like you have that mindset of like, what the fuck, why not?
Yeah. And it's like, there's rules to break and there's rules not. Like, of course, we're going to pay our taxes, right? But then, you know, hey, we can spoon feed yogurt at Expo West, even though we're not an exhibitor. That's an okay rule to break, right? So like, there's the both where
100%.
we are always thinking about like, where can we flex as much as possible?
Okay, Elan, I want to ask you, how do you define success and how has it changed for you over the last like 5 years?
Working on Beny has really shaped my definition of success. And I'm gonna steal a quote. This is something that my old founder used to say when I was working at Alchemy. And the way that he defines it, I think, is really resonant. And the way he looks at it is like there's two axes. There's the number of people that you impact, and then there's the amount and depth that you impact them. And I think in an ideal world, success is maximizing those two things, where you impact as many people as you possibly can and at a really like broad depth or really wide depth for them. And I think, you know, a good example of this would be like the iPhone, right? Like the iPhone impacted so many people so deeply. It is a tool that we use like hours and hours every single day, and it really changes people's lives. I think with Beny, we have the opportunity to impact a ton of people in a really deep way if it can do what it has done for me. And the reason for that is like yogurt has like 93% household penetration. It's already a food that so many people are familiar with and eat. And most people have really bad gut health and could use some improvements on their gut health. So I think that gives us a really broad range of opportunity to impact a lot of people in a really, really deep way. So now I feel like that's how I think about success, especially as we're working on Beny.
I love it. Okay, Kiki, I talked to, you know, a friend of ours, Ellie, who I actually had on She Leads talking about Oddly with Jensen. And one thing she mentioned about you that stood out completely was that you are an incredible host and you've been hosting for years. I want to know, what do you think makes a great host?
Oh, what a great question. And that's very sweet. Thanks, Ellie. I think one of the most important things is connecting with every individual and making them feel welcome and part of a community. Whether they feel like they belong there or not, you see it within them, and you make sure they feel a belonging and a sense of community. And so I think about that a ton as I think about social media is, you know, I have my dinner table here that literally can maybe only fit 4 people in my West Village apartment. But how do I extend that dinner table of 4 people to include 40 and then 400 and then 40,000 while every person still feels special and like there's a real place for them at the table, despite it being so large in this bigger community, in this bigger space. And they actually feel more special because of that, because there is sort of a bigger space for them to be part of. So I don't know, it's always balancing the two of the individual and the group and making sure sort of every individual sees themselves in that group.
By the way, I can already like tell from your social media presence and how you're going about it, like that comes through, right? It's just like making people feel like they're a part of the journey, all of that, which is incredible. My last question that I have for both of you that I always ask is, what craft are you spending a lifetime honing?
Storytelling.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Number one thing I think about now is how you tell your own story and how you tell the story of others, and ensuring that that is landing and resonant with the audience that you're telling that to. So it's not just what you want to communicate, but how it lands. And I think that is the difference, especially as we move further into AI and everything that can do for us. I think the one thing that we still really hold is being able to move people emotionally and, like you said, make them feel part of a journey that we are going on. I think storytelling is one of the best ways you can do that.
I love it. Okay, Elan, you've had some time to think.
Yeah, I'd definitely say curiosity. I think that being curious, even about topics that seem so rudimentary and boring, and finding ways to learn about them and ask questions, I think is really important. And I think especially like as you age, we like become wiser. And so not letting that get in the way of continually being curious, even about people who may seem less experienced or less knowledgeable than we are.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, where can people find you? Where's Beny? How do they keep on your journey and come on with you on this journey? Where do they find you?
To follow our journey, follow me at Couchwoman, because my last name is Couchman. So follow me at Couchwoman. I am on all social media platforms, but most active on Instagram. And then to follow Beny, follow at Eat Beny, EATBENY, again on all platforms. And we have a small starter crew that we're forming. And so if you go to the links in either of our bios, you will find the starter crew. This is like our small wait list where we'll be alerting folks of new yogurt drops. So where we are in New York City, where you can come buy yogurt, where we're doing upcoming events. And we'll see you live in person, either biking around the streets. Make sure to say hi to us, or we'll see you at one of our next upcoming events.
I love it. I love it. I love both of you guys so much. I'm so excited for Beny Yogurt and even to try it. I'm going to be in New York soon and I can't wait to try it. So both of you, I'm so excited. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast to share your incredible journey so far.
Thank you, Carly.